Well, thanks for joining me for another episode of It's Not About the Money. For many Americans, one painful lesson of 2020 has been a first-hand demonstration of the importance of having an emergency fund. Yep, we hear about this over and over from people like me, don't we? And still knowing that is no guarantee that anybody's going to do anything about it. It's kind of like thinking that what we really need to do as a nation where 2/3 of us are overweight and a good percentage of those are obese, that what we really need is more information on how fat grams work and calories. And yet, I would say that 9 out of 10 people who are overweight understand how fat grams and calories work. They don't need any more information. And so I really don't think Americans need more information that a emergency fund is really important. Still, according to Bankrate, 72% of Americans don't have an emergency fund. And most emergency funds, we recommend that you should have 6 to 12 months of living expenses. And that 72% doesn't even have 6 months of funds. What I find interesting is that most people think they understand what an emergency fund is. And most don't really understand the use and the purpose of an emergency fund. There's actually 2 types of emergency funds that a person should have. One is what I'll call the big expenses fund, and this is for expenses too large to cover out of pocket from your monthly cash flow. Now, these are expenses that we actually know are going to happen. They're not emergencies in that sense of the word. We know they're going to happen, we just don't know when. Now, this would be costs like annual health insurance deductibles. We know that we are responsible for the deductible in the policy that we have. I think it's about $6,500 per person with a cap of, say, $13,000. So when something happens and it's a given that we're going to need medical assistance, it's not a surprise when we break a leg or get sick or something like that happens. We don't count on it, but it's still stuff that happens to the human body. So from that standpoint, we can plan on it. We can plan on that deductible being spent. We just don't know when it's going to be spent or what year it's going to be that it will happen in. Vacations are another thing that we pretty much know when a vacation's going to come. Or gifts, Christmas gifts, birthday gifts, home maintenance. We don't know the timing of home maintenance, but we know our roofs are going to wear out. And we know that water heaters are going to break down. And mechanical systems within our homes. We know that things will break down with our vehicles. Again, we just don't know the timing. So that's the big expenses fund. The second savings is the emergency fund. And this is for unforeseen, unpredictable emergencies. And there's basically 2 categories. One is a job loss. and the other are large medical costs beyond insurance deductibles that are not covered by insurance. Only about 1 in 4 or 5 Americans were able to rely on an emergency reserve to help get them through this pandemic. And I suspect that many of those without a fund would agree that they should have one. Now, why doesn't that knowledge translate into action? Some workers barely managing to cover essential expenses, likely they just don't see any way to create an emergency fund. They are so close with their living expenses. For those with higher incomes, they also can live very close. We tend to expand our spending to the income coming in. But I suspect that the more money that we make and don't have an emergency fund, the more complicated the reasons are. And I'm going to suggest that the problem is not in the amount of money we're making, but in the word should. Should has a different meaning and set of behaviors than will. Should denotes a lack of sufficient confidence, importance, and readiness to go into action. Okay, so you should have an emergency fund in this context is fraught with obligation, correctness, criticism, and shame. Shame on you. You should have an emergency fund. Now, these motivators, obligation, correctness, criticism, and shame, rarely result in long-lasting success for any behavioral change. It could happen for a little while, but rarely is it going to be a lasting behavioral change. Now, will has a sense of inevitability. I will create an emergency account. It's very different from I should create an emergency fund. Will carries a high degree of readiness, confidence, and importance. Now, when these three components align on any contemplated change, action is soon to follow. So this is something that I do with my clients from time to time when they're looking at making a change. I have them rate on a 1 to 10. How ready are you to do this? How confident are you? And how important is it? And you might do this. You might just pause this recording for a second and take a situation that you're facing or a change that maybe you should make and rate it 1 to 10. How ready are you? How confident are you? And how important are you? Now, if you've done that, take a look at your numbers. And what we're looking for is an 8 or above in each of those areas. If you're under an 8, that's probably an indication that you're not ready, confident, or it's not important. So you could be 10s in 2 and maybe 5 in 1. So it's the one where you're less than an 8 that a person needs to get curious about. And one easy way is to ask yourself, what would it take to be a 10? So if should is the word you associate with creating an emergency fund, it's time to do something maybe a little bit different, a different plan of attack than in the past. So So one thing you can do is to do what I just went through. How ready, confident, and important is it for you to create an emergency fund? And whatever you do in the inquiry, you need to consider declaring a truce. This is something different. Consider declaring a truce between the part of yourself which is shoulding and shaming, and those parts of you that have their reasons why the savings accounts are not happening. Okay, so typically there's two parts of us. The ones that says you should, shame on you for not having an emergency fund. And there's another part that goes, yeah, I know, but there's another part of me that says whatever. So try this. On a blank sheet of paper, write should at the top. Then, without giving it a lot of thought, list all the reasons you can think of for creating an emergency and a big expenses funds. Put down why they are important, why the timing is right if it's right, why you have the confidence, just all of the reasons, assuming you do, of course, all the reasons that you should have an emergency account. Don't censor yourself. Write down every thought that comes up, logical or illogical. Especially pay attention to the illogical ones. And remember, you're not handing this in. Nobody is going to see it. Then when you're done with that, you got them all out, take another sheet of paper and write should not at the top. Now list all the reasons against creating these savings accounts. Why they are unimportant, why they're unnecessary, why you don't have the confidence to act. Every reason you can think of that you're not ready to do this, you shouldn't do this, or it's not important to do this. And again, no censoring. So when you're done with that, review both lists, but do so from a place of non-judgment. Take yourself above those parts. Kind of remove yourself as an unbiased observer and recognize that each of these parts have their reasons and there's no part that's wrong. Look at what answers that might surprise you or contain a viewpoint or some information that you've never consciously considered. And then as you're looking at all this, look for a compromise, a way to craft a win-win course of action that will address the major concerns of each viewpoint, letting those parts of you that have different viewpoints know that they've got a point and their point is important. It might mean saving less per month than what's ideal, but saving something toward these accounts is significantly more than nothing. It could mean temporarily reducing contributions to a 401k plan and redirecting that money to an emergency fund. It could mean securing today a line of credit on your home that could be accessed immediately in the case of an emergency. There are potentially an unlimited number of creative actions that could be taken to solve the concerns of both sides of this argument. Whatever you do, though, no matter how small it is, any step you take towards starting to provide for yourself and your family is a big one. So, I hope this is helpful, and thanks for joining me, and I look forward to being with you in another session.